Howdy folks. I thought it'd be fun to do a tequila video, but rather than just talk about tequila, I thought it'd be more fun to talk about tequila and how it's different from mezcal. Mezcal and tequila are similar products, but they do have some key differences in their production method. So I think we'll just go over all of that. Let's go. Okay, so tequila and mezcal do go through similar processes to get from agave to your glass. But tequila does tend to happen on a much larger scale. I would argue that the smaller scale, less efficient processes that mezcal makers use, they result in a much more interesting spirit. So let's run through how to make tequila and mezcal. We can compare and contrast. So tequila can only be made from one type of agave, and that's the blue agave, sometimes called the tequila agave. Mezcal, on the other hand, can be made from a wide variety of agave. It can be a bit confusing because some agaves go by different names in different regions, and it's a little hard to keep track of what's going on. But here's a list of a few you might see around. Now, many of these agaves grow out in the wild and have to be harvested out in the wild, which can be quite an undertaking because they can weigh hundreds of pounds and they can grow in some quite remote places. Now, there is one variety called espadín, which can easily be farmed, and so that's the most common one that you'll see in the cheaper bottles. Blue agave, on the other hand, is grown almost exclusively on estates or farms, and it does take almost 7 years to come to maturity. But since it's grown on a farm, it's a lot easier to harvest, but they're still very, very heavy. Now, the agaves need to be roasted to convert the starch into sugars that can be fermented. The traditional way is to use a brick or stone oven. Some producers do use what's called an autoclave. It's like a big stainless steel oven, but it's pressurized and uses steam, sort of like a pressure cooker. There's a third method that is often looked down upon in tequila world, and that's called a diffuser. A diffuser doesn't cook the agave at all, but uses hydrochloric acid and I think high pressure steam to shred apart the agave and convert the starch to sugar chemically. It tends to make a much less flavorful tequila, and a lot of people don't really like them. You might want to avoid those. Mezcal, on the other hand, is most often roasted in an underground pit, like an earthen oven, sort of like roasting a pig. You dig a pit, you build a big fire and let it burn down to coals. You put a bunch of agave on there, then you cover it all up and let it roast for 4 days or a week. Now, once the agave is roasted, you do need to shred it or smash it in order to get the juice out so it can be fermented. There's a couple ways that they do this. Often it's done by hand with a mallet or an axe. Some people have a shredder of some sort, and some folks also have a tahona. But the tahona is also something that's traditionally used for tequila. The tahona is a big stone wheel. It'll be 4 or 5 feet in diameter, huge. It'll be pulled in a circle, usually by like a donkey. They'll put the agaves under the wheel to get crushed by this huge wheel. Most producers will use something more efficient, like a shredder or rollers that press the agave and extract the juice that way. But once you have that sweet juice, it's time to ferment. Most tequila gets fermented in like a big stainless steel vat, sometimes like a concrete pit. And they will add in a specific yeast to help control the flavor of the final product. Now, mezcal is usually fermented in big wooden vats that are open to the air. And they'll use just the natural yeasts that are either on the agave already or floating around in the air. This is one of the big reasons why the flavors of mezcal are so varied. It's because of the various yeasts that exist in the world and can be different from, one side of the valley to the other, or even on different days. Different yeasts might be more present. So this means that different batches of mezcal can taste pretty different just based on the different yeasts that end up in the fermentation tank. Once the fermentation is done, it's time to distill the mezcal. That is sometimes done in a clay pot, but more often these days in a small copper pot still. Now, tequila is distilled in much larger stills, sometimes copper, sometimes stainless steel, and sometimes in column stills. Tequila is double distilled, and so some producers will use a column still for one distillation and a pot still for the other. As we've discussed before, column stills usually produce sort of a cleaner, lighter, less flavorful product. Tequila is then sometimes aged. Blanco tequila is unaged, but Reposado is aged between 2 and 12 months. añejo tequila between 1 and 3 years, and extra añejo anything over 3 years. This is usually done in ex-bourbon barrels, but that's not a rule. They can use wine barrels or I think any kind of oak barrel that they like. There are some tequilas that are very old, like Fuente Seca, that are aged exclusively in wine barrels. That lets them sit a lot longer without getting too oaky. Mezcal is not usually aged. There are a couple of reposado mezcals out on the market, but it's much less common than the unaged mezcal. I think my general point here is that mezcal is a much less efficient, less industrialized process than tequila. There's a lot less consistency in mezcal, which is one of the things that makes it fun. You're never really sure when you get a bottle of mezcal what it's exactly going to taste like. Whereas tequila, I feel like, mostly tastes like tequila. But there's a much broader range of flavors in mezcal. Tequila, you have to dig a little deeper to find the nuances between different brands. Now, there are tons of good tequilas out there. It just makes sense to pick one that isn't cutting any corners. Okay. Jumping in here to tell you about a great tequila resource that I forgot to mention earlier called Tequila Matchmaker. Now, there are 3 really cool things that make Tequila Matchmaker super useful. One is they have reviews from like a panel of experts or something, and also from the community at large. Now, these may or may not be super useful, but they might be. Now, number 2 is they have a database of all tequila distilleries. There are about 110 tequila distilleries, but there are many, many more brands. Every tequila distillery gets a number, a 4-digit number that they print on all the bottles. It's called the NOM, or the NOM. By the way, mezcal distilleries also have an NOM number. That's not in this database that I'm talking about. I haven't found a good database for those. But if you do go to mezcalreviews.com, there's a pretty good amount of information there on mezcals and their NOMs. So anyway, you could look up any tequila you wanted. You can find out who makes it, what other tequilas they make, where they are, the production methods, all sorts of stuff. Very cool. Now, the third thing at Tequila Matchmakers is they have a certified additive-free program. Tequila producers are allowed to add additives to the tequila. That could be sugar or coloring. Some of them might even use oak extract to sort of cheat the aging process. Now, this practice is pretty frowned upon among aficionados. And these guys at Tequila Matchmaker have additive-free certification program where they'll randomly test samples from the distillery and check to see if there's any additives in them. And if there isn't, then they're certified additive-free. This little symbol will show up on the Tequila Matchmaker's website, so you can go there and check and see if they're definitely additive-free. Now, this is a voluntary program, obviously. Not everyone participates. So just because a brand isn't verified, that doesn't mean they're using additives, just that they're not participating in this program. I thought I'd just go check a brand that I know and like pretty well called Cimarron. It is verified additive free, which is neat. It's made of the same distillery as Fuente Seca, which is a delicious, excellent tequila. So I think I might go get a bottle of this stuff. It's not very expensive. I can do a little taste test of margaritas against my normal mixing tequila. Now, when it comes to cocktails, I typically stick with Altos Blanco. It's a pretty good tequila and not too expensive. Of course, you should only buy tequila that's 100% agave. My recommendation, if you're looking for a good tequila to use, is to buy 2 or 3 that are in your price range, make a bunch of margaritas, and do a taste test. I mean, that goes for any spirit, really. But you might want to avoid ones that were started by celebrities. In terms of sippers, here's a short list of ones that I've enjoyed in the past. On hand right now, I've got Ocho, Arete, and El Tesoro Añejo. Those are pretty good. But I've also heard really good things about G4. Fortaleza I've had in the past is amazing. Pasote is good. There's Fuente Seca, and there's another one called Patrida, which is pretty interesting. Now, for mezcal cocktails, I usually stick with Bozal. It's really my go-to. If I can't find Bozal, sometimes I'll use Los Llaves. That's a pretty good one. In a pinch, I'll use Banez. There are some more sort of widely available brands out there like Montelobos or Union, Sombra, or Vida Mezcal. Those are okay for mixing. They're not my favorite. If you can find a brand that's not owned by a mega corporation, maybe try and pick one of those up. In terms of sippers, I do belong to a mezcal club called Maguey Malate, which is amazing. They deliver some really special mezcals, but there are some really good brands out on the market as well. Vago Mezcal is very good. Illegal is good. La Luna, not bad. There's one called Oaxaca, spelled with a W. I like the Del Maguey Single Village Mezcals are very good. Bruxo is another good one. There's a lot of really good brands. But look around and do a little research, and hopefully you could find some good mezcal to drink. Okay, so that was kind of a long episode, and hopefully that was entertaining and or informative. If you have any questions, I can possibly answer them. Put them down in the comments. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.